welcome back. We're on to lesson 7 notes, equation of a sinusoidal function, part 2. So last day we talked about the typical form of a sine function. We talked about the a value, we talked about the d value. Remember, a is your amplitude, d is your vertical displacement, where your midline is. And today we're going to focus on the b. So a little bit of information before, the b is very closely related to the period of a function, which is the trickiest part of probably the unit, is the period. So let's kind of review a little bit of everything first. The period of a graph is defined as the length of one complete cycle of a trig function. So this graph has a period of 2 pi. So it starts here, it goes up, it goes down, and then it goes up to that starting point again, and then it just repeats. So often what we'll do to kind of help figure out the period is pick a nice starting point. You want something that's easy to read off the graph. This one is right at 0, that's nice. And then figure out where a complete revolution is. That is described as the period, and then it keeps repeating itself. So for the next graph here, if we start here, you can see it goes up, it goes down, and then it comes up again. It completes a full revolution by 4 pi. And again, this one works out nicely. Most of the ones I'll give you work out nicely. Some you have to think about a little bit. So you can see the period of this graph is 4 pi. And same for this one here. You can see a complete revolution starts here, goes up, goes down, comes back up, and then that repeats itself again. Your period here is pi. We'll do one more example on the next page. Let's do the top one here. So again, you're looking for that full revolution. Here's a nice starting point. It goes up, it goes down, and it goes back to that starting point. There is your period, and your period, you can see, is now 2 pi over 3. Okay, so little refresher from before, I just talked about that on the last page. There's your general information for your sine and cosine functions. A is amplitude, D is vertical displacement. We talked about that in the last topic. And now we're talking about this B value, the horizontal stretch. It's basically like your sine graph is a string and you're stretching it out either longer so that your amplitude isn't as high, or your period is longer, I guess I should say, or you're kind of crunching it up a little bit closer and you get a smaller period. Okay, on your formula sheet, you have one of these formulas. I don't know if you have both of them. Your B value is closely related to your period. It's not your period of your graph though, so that's the biggest mistake people make is they just pop it right in there. They're closely related, but they're not the same. If you have the period, or if you have your B value and you want to find the period of your graph, so you can draw your graph, you're going to use this to figure out what the period is. If you have the period of the graph, maybe a diagram of the graph, and you're trying to write the equation with your B value, then you're going to use this version. It's the same equation, it's just rearranged. So you can either solve for the period or solve for your B value. So let's look at a couple examples. Sorry, my phone keeps beeping. Apparently I'm popular today. Okay, so y equals cos 2x. So I can see my b value here is 2. So if I wanted to figure out my period, I'm going to use this equation here, 2 pi over b. So I know my period is going to be 2 pi over that b value, which was 2, and then I'm going to simplify it. 2 over 2 is a 1, those cancel. So that means your period here would be pi. Same for the next one, similar idea. If you want to figure out what your period is, this is your b value. So you're just going to go 2 pi divided by a half. And remember, we don't want decimals or anything. We want to keep it in complete radians, exact values. So I'm just going to go 2 divided by a quarter, which is going to give me 4 pi. Basically, I'm just simplifying this portion of it and then sticking that pi on there so I have an exact value. You can go through the other examples on your own, but basically that's all you do. 2 pi divided by your b value tells you what your period is. So let's put this into use on the next page. We want to draw the sine equation for the following graph. So we want to figure out what the equation is. For these ones, we're just working with b value, so I'm not throwing in your amplitude or vertical displacement yet. So let's just figure out b value. So I have the kind of shortened part of the formula we're working with. So it's directly related to your period. So if you have your graph, you have to figure out your period first, do a little extra work to figure out your b value, and then just pop it right in. So starting with this graph, this is a nice starting point. I can see my graph goes up, goes down, then goes up again. So that's one complete revolution here. So I can see it has a period of 10 pi. If I want to write the equation though, I'm not going to put 10 pi in there. I want to figure out my b value. So I have the period, but I need the b value. And remember from the previous page, b is 2 pi divided by your period. So to figure out b, I'm just going to go 2 pi divided by 10 pi. Pi's are going to cancel, and then 2 over 10 simplifies to 1 over 5. So that tells me my b value must have been 1 over 5. So in this case, I can just pop that right in there. You can use brackets there if you want, just to keep it easy to read, but you don't have to have brackets there. Next one's done in a similar way. You can look at the notes for the next one and figure that one out. Here, I give you information in words, and you have to figure out what the equation is. So this one tells me it's a sine function, and it has an amplitude of 2 over 3. That means my y value is 2 over 3. I know it's a sine function. And then it tells me that period is pi over 6. So do not put pi over 6 theta here. You want your b value here, not your period. So you're going to have to go up to the side and figure out your b value. Your b value is 2 pi divided by your period. When you do that in your calculator, you should get 12. So my b value here is a 12. And that's the equation of that one there. Part B I'll do too, just because I throw an extra little twist in here. It's a cosine function having an amplitude of 3. So right away I know it's going to look like this. And then a period of 720 degrees. When we're writing our equation, we like it in radians. I want to see pi in there. So remember from previously, we can rewrite 720 degrees into radians. Remember how to change degrees to radians? You're just going to multiply by pi over 180. And you're going to see that it's equal to 4 pi radians. Now you can figure out your b value. You can't use it with degrees because your b value is already assuming that you're working in radians. So we're going to go 2 pi over your period, which was 4 pi. That simplifies to a half. And so now you know your b value is a half. And that one's done. I'll do the next one too because it's a graph now, which is a little different again. It tells us it's a sine function. So I know that much. And then now we need to figure out all our little bits, okay? So we need to figure out what A is, what D is, and what B is. A is your amplitude. First thing I always do with the graphs is I look for my midline because that helps smooth everything else. My midline here is actually right at the x-axis. Okay, your max is at 3, your mid's at -3, your x-axis is your midline. So technically my vertical displacement is 0. Now I can see what my amplitude is. From the midline, it peaks at 3, so that's my amplitude. Then I'm going to make sure it's not a -3. If I look at my sine graph, it's going up to start, so that means it's +3. If it was coming down here instead, it would have been a -3. Okay, now the b value, that's the trickiest part. We have to figure out what the period is and then calculate the b value. So my starting point here is great. It has 1 revolution up, 1 revolution down, and then ends here and then repeats. So I can see that the period of this graph is pi. Remember, that's your period, not your b value. Now you can figure out your b value by going 2 pi divided by your period, which is 2. So I can see my b value is 2. Once you figure out your A, your D, and your B, you can just pop it into your equation. So remember, A is 3, B I figured out is 2, and my D is 0, so I don't have to write that. So that's your equation of this graph. Let's do a couple more. So let's go on the back page. Here it's opposite. So the one I had, it gave me the graph and I wanted to find the equation. Now I have the equation and I want to draw the graph. So looking at this, you need to think about your A, B, and D. My A here is 1, right? We just don't usually write it. So my amplitude is 1. I don't have anything added on to the end, so my D is just 0. That tells me that the x-axis is my midline. So that's a nice starting point. Then it tells me my B is 2. So now I have to work backwards and figure out my period for the graph. So if you're given a graph and you need the equation, you're going to find your b value. If you're given the equation and you want to draw your graph, you're going to want to know the period. So the period is going to be 2 pi divided by your b value. So I know my period is pi. That means I need to have a complete revolution by this point here. I have to have a full revolution by that point there. So what you'll see is you need 4 sections in order to do a complete revolution. So that's nice. I have 4 sections here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So now we're going to look. It's a cos graph. So I'm going to start at the 0 point. I'm going to use a different color here. And my cos graph starts at its highest point, and my amplitude is 1. So I know it's going to start here at 1. And then I need to do a complete revolution. So I know I have to come down to this point, go down to my lowest point, come back to this point, and then come back to here. That's one complete revolution. Once you have that figured out, the rest just follows the same pattern. So I'm just going to copy what I did. It's hard to see my dot, so hopefully I do it right. Okay, and then you can just continue on your graph nicely from there. It's got a period of pi, amplitude of 1, vertical displacement of 0. There, perfect. And that's your graph of cos 2 theta, and you can even check it on your calculator if you would like. Okay, you can check out how I did the next one as well. And then the other one is just analyzing an equation and getting information from it. You can kind of see what I did there. The only thing you might notice is this extra bit here. Technically, this full equation is this, and C is your horizontal translation. It means you're shifting and sliding your graph left to right. We don't cover that here. You might see some equations with it, but I'm not going to ask you what your C value is or make you draw anything with C values. So just as long as you're clear with that. So you can look through the bottom examples if you like, and I'll do a couple more on the last page, and then I'll let you go. Okay, so let's do the second one here. We want to write the trig equation to represent this graph. So first thing I always do is draw the midline. This helps you get all your rest of your information. So lowest point is 0, highest point is 6. That means right in the middle is 3. That's my midline. Next, I'm going to figure out all my answers. So I want to figure out A, I want to figure out D, and I want to figure out B. I already figured out D. It's right where the midline is. It's going to be 3. Your amplitude, you're going to look and see how high this gets. From the midline, it's going to be 3 as well. And now we have to figure out B. Remember, B requires a little bit extra work. We're going to have to figure out what our period is. So I'm going to start here. It's going to go down and then up and then down again. That's one full revolution. I can see that happen within pi. So my period is pi. So now I can go back and figure out what my B is because it's 2 pi divided by your period. So my B value is 2. Now I have all the information I need to start writing my equation. Okay, I notice at the midline it starts right at the 0, so I know it's a sine function. So I'm going to put 3 sine. My B value is 2. And my D value is 3. And something else I forgot in my notes. I think I missed a negative in my last notes too. So apparently I'm losing it near the end here. If you notice, my graph goes down to start rather than up. So you need to pop a negative in the front. And I don't think I put that in my notes. Must have been sleeping. So I caught it here. So lucky for you if you're watching my notes, you can catch it as well. Because I can see it's flipped upside down compared to the regular. Okay, I'll do one more example here, just writing trig equations. Here it gives me all the information I need, and I want to figure out what my trig equation is. It tells me it's a sine function, amplitude 4. So right away, I can write this. It tells me it has a period of pi over 2. Be careful, I need a b value for my equation, so I need to figure that out first. It's going to be 2 pi divided by pi over 2, which equals 4. So my b value is 4. And then it says a vertical displacement of down 6. That means there's a -6 tacked on the end. And don't forget, I put the y equals here already for you. But if you had just written out this part without the y equals, I'm taking off half a mark because it's not an equation if you don't have an equal sign. You need to say y equals 4 sine 4 theta minus 6. So you can check out the rest on your own. Have a great day.